In medicine, there's this foundational principle that every single treatment gets measured against. So, when a group of top scientists were tasked way back in 1999 with taking a serious look at marijuana, well, that's exactly where they started. We're going to walk through their landmark report and really understand the science based risks they uncovered.
Primum non nocere. It's a Latin phrase, and it's basically the doctor's first rule of thumb.
First, do no harm. Simple, right? But that idea was the absolute core of this 1999 report. The whole point was to slice right through all the political talk and the cultural noise and just look at the science, to figure out what the actual demonstrable harms of marijuana were and to separate the hard facts from, the fiction.
So, where do you even begin with a task like that? Well, they've started with the most obvious and relatable effect of all, the high itself. What did the science actually say about that experience? No real surprises here, right? The report listed all the effects you'd expect, that feeling of euphoria, the laughter, the talkativeness, but it also pointed out the other side of that coin. That high comes with some very real cognitive trade-offs, like a noticeable hit to your short-term memory that can make just carrying on a normal conversation pretty difficult. And this is absolutely crucial. That high isn't always a good time. For a significant number of people, it's actually the opposite. The report found that about 17%, that's almost 1 in 5 regular users, had bad reactions like anxiety or even paranoia, especially when they were new to it. Now, just imagine giving something with that kind of risk to a patient who's already sick. That's a serious factor to weigh. All right, let's wade into one of the most heated topics, dependence. Is it addictive? This is where the specific words we use really matter.
So let's just ask the big question head on. Is marijuana addictive? Well, to get a real scientific answer, the report shows us that we first have to get super precise about what we even mean by the word addictive. It's not as simple as you might think. So the clinical gold standard they were using back then was this term, substance dependence. And look, it's not just about using a substance a lot. It's a very specific pattern where the use becomes compulsive, it causes you real problems in your life, and this is key, it involves tolerance and withdrawal. This was the scientific yardstick.
And here's where the report draws a bright, clear line that's so important. It separates the idea of physical dependence, things like your body building up a tolerance, which can happen with tons of normal prescription drugs, from the behavior of addiction, which is that compulsive, pathological pattern of use. These are not the same thing, and knowing the difference is everything. Okay, so using that strict clinical definition, how does marijuana stack up? Well, the report pointed to this major national study, and the numbers are pretty eye-opening. Tobacco, way at the top. Almost a third of people who use it become dependent. Then you've got heroin, cocaine, and even alcohol. And where's marijuana? It's down here at the bottom of the list, at about 9%. To really put that 9% into perspective, this chart makes it obvious. The takeaway isn't that marijuana dependence isn't real. It is. But the data showed that the risk was actually lower than for 2 of the most widely available and legal substances on the planet, tobacco and alcohol. The report also confirmed that, yes, there is a withdrawal syndrome. Now, they described it as pretty mild. So we're not talking about the kind of a life-threatening withdrawal you'd see with alcohol or opioids. But in controlled lab studies, they consistently saw symptoms like restlessness, irritability, and trouble sleeping when heavy users stopped. So it's definitely a real thing. Okay, so that gives us a clearer picture of dependence. But what about the immediate, right-now effects on your brain every time someone uses it? On this front, the report's findings were totally unambiguous. Using marijuana impairs a whole list of critical brain functions. But the one that really raised red flags was what scientists call psychomotor performance. That's just a fancy way of saying your physical coordination and reaction time. The stuff you absolutely need to drive a car or operate any kind of machinery safely. And to see just how serious that is in the real world, the report pointed to this incredible study. They took experienced airplane pilots, and even a full 24 hours after smoking just one marijuana cigarette, their performance in a flight simulator was significantly worse. But here's the truly chilling part. The pilots themselves felt completely fine. They were confident they were flying perfectly. So what about the more severe psychiatric stuff? Well, the report was very careful here. It found that for people who are already vulnerable to psychosis, heavy marijuana use could act as a trigger for an episode. But, and this is a big but, it found very little evidence that the drug itself could actually cause a long-term, permanent psychotic disorder like schizophrenia from scratch. All right, so we've covered the risks to the mind. What about the body? This is where the report found that the biggest problem wasn't necessarily the drug itself, but the way it's delivered, through smoking. Here is a number from the report that just leaps off the page. Because of how people typically smoke it, without a filter and inhaling much more deeply, a marijuana joint can leave behind up to 4 times more tar in your lungs than a tobacco cigarette of the same weight. 4 times. And what happens when you get all that extra tar in your lungs? Well, the report found exactly what you'd expect, a clear and direct link to the same kinds of respiratory problems you see in tobacco smokers, things like chronic bronchitis, a persistent cough, and actual measurable damage to the cells that line your airways. But the scientists were also incredibly precise. Even though they confirmed all that cellular damage from smoking, they were very clear that, as of 1999, the big population-level studies had not yet proven a definitive cause and effect link to lung cancer or COPD. The evidence just wasn't there to take that final step. And this brings us to one of the most famous, and maybe one of the most misunderstood questions of all when it comes to marijuana: the gateway drug theory. Is it real? The report tackled this huge question by, very smartly, breaking it down into 2 completely different ideas. So on one side, you have what's called the stepping stone idea. This is the theory that there's something in the drug itself, a chemical effect, that rewires your brain and makes you want to try other harder drugs. The report looked at the science and found basically no evidence for that. Then you have the gateway theory. This one isn't about biology, it's about society. The argument is that because marijuana is illegal, it provides a gateway into a social world where other illegal drugs are just more available and more accepted. And the report concluded that this theory fit the data much better. So after all of that, after methodically laying out all the science on all the harms, the 1999 report basically leaves us right here. It proved the risks, from dependence to fuzzy thinking to lung damage, are absolutely real. And that forces us to face the central question that is still at the heart of the entire debate today. For a person who is truly suffering, are the potential benefits worth taking on those risks?